worship animals, guys.
Right.
The Egyptians were so secular people. They were desperate to see their gods. According to the powers and the qualifications of these gods, they have matched, figures of the animals to suit these powers and qualifications. For example, Amun-Ra is wise and he's also strong. So in some of his figures, he would look like the body of the lion to reflect his strength and the head of the ram to reflect his wisdom. Now the question here, why the ram is a symbol of wisdom? Because the Egyptians were farmers. The sum of all wisdom for them is to find the water. And it is proved that only the ram that can detect the underground water. And he smells the water from a distance. So the Egyptians had known that, and they thought, a great deal of the ram, of his wisdom, because it can find, the water. That's why they made it a symbol of wisdom. This is the case in all the figures of the animals and the birds that we see for our ancient Egyptian gods, except one, the crocodile. Egyptians did worship an animal in the crocodile. The relationship with the crocodile, started with animosity. It was an enemy because the water, the Nile, is the kingdom of the crocodile. We are farmers. We want water from the Nile to irrigate our lands. So we get attacked by the crocodiles. So it was war. Crocodiles are killing the Egyptians are killing the crocodiles. The Egyptians started to think more general. They wanted to monitor the crocodiles, to find a weakness in them that would enable them to win this war once and for all. Monitoring started to become fascination with the nature of this creature. The quick snap of the jaws on the prey, the tremendous power of the strike of the tail. Egyptians started to be fascinated. Then they started to respect them. Respect that this is their way of life. And then they started to revere them. And reverence ended up by worshipping them as gods of war because of their strength, and also hunting. One aspect that the Egyptians were not very good at, they were domestic, they were, farmers, settlers. They were not, hunters, they were not fishermen, they were farmers, maybe. Okay? As I told you, the greatest number of crocodiles in Egypt would be here in Kumam. Historically, this place is built in the Greco-Roman era. That we started it with the temple of Philae on the island of Philae, and we are returning to it, today also when we visit Kumam like now, and when we go also to Edfu. Let me recap this very quickly. 300 years of the Greeks, from 332 to 31 before Christ, and then almost 700 years of the Romans, from 31 before Christ up to 642 AD. That's when the Arabs came to the country. So this was started it during the time of the Greeks and ended in the 1st century AD by the Romans. The Greeks, when they came here, guys, they faced a dilemma, existential question. Do we rule Egypt from Egypt, or do we go back to Greece?
Hey Mike, who's that?
Leave the troops here and do it like a normal occupation. The troops are controlling, we do certain roads for our troops, to control the whole country. Or do we stay in Egypt, live in Egypt and rule it, from the country itself? They went back to Greece. They were treated like soldiers of Alexander the Great. When they were here in Egypt, they were treated like kings. So this was a slam dunk for them. Now we are going to stay in Egypt, rule Egypt from Egypt. But that would have required from them to Egyptianize themselves, to adopt the Egyptian culture, to adopt the Egyptian religion, to become Egyptians. And so they have done. Through the 300 years, of the ruling of the Greeks, they have been immersed, integrated with the Egyptian culture and the Egyptian religion, to the extent that the people from around the world, they do not know the distinction. And I'll tell you the example. Cleopatra. We had 7 Cleopatras. The 7th is the famous one. The 7th is Elizabeth Taylor, And everybody is considering Cleopatra as an Egyptian queen. She was not Egyptian. She is from the Greek, house that ruled Egypt for 300 years. But that's the result of this, concept that the Greeks had, is to immerse themselves within the Egyptian culture and the Egyptian religion. They were so smart politicians. They have known that if you want to go through the hearts and the minds of the Egyptians, you have to do it in a religious way. That's why they started this massive plan of building temples for the most beloved gods and goddesses of Egypt. They come here to Komombo. Komombo, there were 2 gods to be worshipped. The falcon-headed god Horus and the crocodile-headed god Sopek. So they thought, why do a temple for just one god? We can do a temple for 2 gods, and that was the first time to be done in ancient Egypt. They have seen a lot of ancient Egyptian terminology in the number 2. The crown of the north, the crown of the south. The goddess of the north, the goddess of the south. A lot of ancient Egyptian symbolism in the number 2. So let's do the temple for 2 gods. Right? Okay. This temple, my dear gods, my dear gods, yes. My dear guests, this temple is really banged by the Nile. When the Egyptians changed their religion, when they became Christians and then Muslims, they neglected these places, So the Nile was allowed to flood inside the temple every year. So that was the result, There's a lot of damaging that happened to the columns, the walls, the ceilings of the temple of Komombo. But something that is very interesting that happened. what had survived here is not repeated in any other temple all over Egypt. The scene of the purification and the coronation of the king in ancient Egypt, and it is only found here in Kamambo Temple. The scene of an offering list, when we have studied it, it told us information about the ancient Egyptian calendar and how they calculated time. Another scene at the back of the temple, for Imhotep as a god of architecture and medicine, receiving a table of offering. We call it the scene of the surgical instruments. And on the table of offerings, actually, there are every surgical tool that you can think of, and it is used until now, which is the proof that the Egyptians could handle the human body while it was alive. Because mummification is the evidence that we could handle corpses, So all this was like, a fortune, a big fortune for